Welcome back to the Strong Family Project podcast. I'm Joe, joined by Mel.
Welcome back to the Strong Family Project podcast, where we guide you on the path to raising confident, independent, and resilient children in a strong family environment.
In today's episode, we are going to teach 4 different ways to build deeper relationships with your children. It is a two-way street. This will also reward you, and they'll have a deeper relationship with you. You'll have a deeper relationship with them. I would guess 2 of these things on the list are going to be things that you may have not thought of before. So before we dive in, it's been a couple weeks since we actually recorded a podcast. A lot's happened in the last couple weeks. Mel, why don't you share a family highlight?
In the last few weeks?
Yeah, I was going to, but I already said a couple weeks twice, and I didn't want to repeat it. So I'm glad you threw it in there, and everyone knows where we're at. Last couple weeks last. Yep. Go ahead, Mel.
You know. Highlight for me is watching my older 2, Logan and Henry, play in their sports, in their games. It's been awesome because I've seen such incredible progress, and specifically what's been a highlight is one of them was struggling with getting really anxious before the games. And there's one particular day where Joe was out of town, and I had to try to get them to both of their games, which were happening in 2 different places at the same time. So I had a friend picking up Henry, and he had to stay home for a little while by himself before that. And I could tell he was anxious, and I was trying to remind him. We've talked about some strategies about what to think about, what to do when you're having a hard time during the game or before the game. And I looked over and saw this next sticker on a water bottle. And this is something that I got from Vince, which we've talked about him before. And it basically means instead of looking back at what went wrong, just look at what's next. What can you do next to move forward? And I ended up writing it on his hand. Just came to me spur of the moment, wrote it on his hand, and it was a visual for him to see during the game. And it really helped him. And then the following week, he was at a friend's house, and we had to go pick him up to go to another game. He had rewritten it on his own. So that was a huge highlight for me, because sometimes we're doing this, the constant gentle pressure, and you don't always see the results. And that for me was like a huge highlight, because it's like seeing results of our gentle efforts to push him in a certain direction. So that was exciting.
Really helped him. That was powerful because he was very hard on himself when he would miss shots. He has such a high expectation because he takes the effort. He trains. He's great at footwork. He would practice drills, kick the soccer ball around the house. We're pretty lenient with that stuff so he can enjoy it and practice inside and make it practical for him. And he was just missing shots. They make him go in practice during the game. He's so hard on himself, head down, things like that. So we had to help him work through it. And that was a philosophy picked up from a business mastermind group, which is, hey, when something goes wrong, next, what's the next thing you can do? What's the very next step you can move forward? You miss a shot in soccer, okay, next play. Same with any sport, next play. Like, screw something up, and you let it spiral out of control, so now you screw up the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing, because you are panicking, and you got your head down. Oh, it can be very frustrating. You see a lot of teams and kids spiral out of control with that because they don't have the strategies to be able to bounce back when they make a mistake. Same goes for parenting. How many times have we heard stories, and we're probably guilty of it ourselves, where you get home frustrated from work, you had a bad day, you're down, and then you screw up the next relationship you have, the next conversation you have, because you're so frustrated, and you're not like, all right, bad day, next, what's going to happen tomorrow, what's going to happen in the next day. So we can learn from that little strategy as well.
We've talked about emotional intelligence before, and I even use that term with the kids, because that's really what I want it to be. You have to acknowledge that you're having this issue, this anxiety, or this being hard on yourself, and then you have to be able to move to what can you do about it. Because as adults, we want our kids to have emotional intelligence, have that ability.
I'll share something from a similar vein. Last year when we started the podcast, we actually discussed this on an episode where we had our son who was doing a lot of great extracurricular activities, but was not very active. And so we had a rule, which is you have to choose one sport or activity where you're active. And said, if you want to go to jiu-jitsu, if you want to do a lesson somewhere, we'll pay for it, invest it. You can choose a school sport. You can choose something out of school, whatever you want, but you have to choose one. And he pushed back and was grumpy about it. And Mel got sad about it. And she talked about it to me frequently. And he said, all right, we're just going to hold the line. And the reason why I'm telling you this story is because when you work through these difficult things and don't just give in, there can be some real gold at the end of the rainbow. He worked through it. He made his pick. He decided to play football this past fall. They also have football in the spring and decided to play it again. And we've really seen tremendous growth out of him in terms of his ability to move his body. He's been more uncoordinated. He had some OT issues, occupational therapy issues, when he was in elementary school. He tried to work on jumping jacks, and half of his body just wouldn't work right together. Instead of saying, that's just how it is forever, so why don't you try a sport activity? Maybe you can work through some of these coordination issues. And he has. And initially, it was a lot of pushback because it's hard work. They do push-ups with the team all the time. Team's not great. And so they're constantly getting themselves into sprints at practice and all this other stuff that goes along with playing a sport. And he's been able to work through it. And work through it well enough to come out again and play an extra season here in the spring, because they offer fall and spring in this state, and will be training to do it again in the fall. He doesn't have to be a big athlete. It doesn't really matter at all to us. It matters that he's choosing things to work on his physical health to complement the things that he's doing to work on his scholastic health.
And we're in the final week of the season now, and he's super disappointed that it's going to be over. And that is not something that I anticipated from the start.
Mel thought it was going to be terrible, terrible. Logan complained, and Mel wanted to let him off the hook, and we had to talk about him. We had to work through it, and had to hold it all together. And fortunately, she did. She didn't make eye contact when I talked to him. She'd look around like he's so uncomfortable. They were making him do something that he doesn't necessarily want to do in the moment. And because it fit our core values, he needs to be adventurous. He needs to stretch his comfort zone, and being adventurous is one of our family core values. Got to give this a shot. You can choose any. You can do mountain biking. You could do whatever. It doesn't have to be this one sport. Whatever you want. He picked one, went with it, and he's taken to it and learned a lot of life lessons in the last 9 months.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Was there's so many lessons to be learned for him as an individual, and like a teammate, and also for us as parents, and maybe me more specifically, where sometimes I have a hard time seeing past my kid's reaction in the moment. I don't see it playing out well, and I need to trust that it will.
On at strongfamilyproject.com, we have the steps of the Strong Family Path for you for free to download. One of the steps are relationships in the household. So today's episode is going to be focused entirely on diving deeper on relationships in the household. On the Strong Family Path, we simply mention that you need to be aware of all of them. Husband to wife, dad to kids, mom to kids to each other. There's a lot of relationships to keep an eye on, and being aware of it does take some of the problems away immediately. But what are some other strategies that we can dive deeper? So we have a few for you today. And the first strategy that I'm going to share, and then Mel's going to go for two, is take advantage of the moments when they come. It is very tough to manufacture a moment where you can sit down and say, all right, let's sit down and talk about something. It almost feels like they're getting called into the principal's office. This realization happened the other day when I was sitting by the windowsill. I leave my phone in the room just so I'm open to observe what's going on in the household. And Everett comes over and sits at the table. He's 6, classic 6-year-old. His feet don't touch the ground. He's kicking them a little bit, playing with some cards at the table. And that was a perfect opportunity to strike up a conversation. We start chatting a little bit. And he said, oh, do you want to play Uno? Yeah, I'll play Uno with you. And it was just because I was sitting there and aware for the opportunity to land in my lap. And he's just was looking for something to do. That gets harder and harder as kids get more distracted. And they're more on tech, which, I mean, it's popular to point the finger at tech, but it is true that they are either on it or waiting to be on it a lot of times. And if you can find the moments in between to make them deeper and more valuable, they're going to start to appreciate that part of life just as much as the other part of life. I don't think we're going to fight a battle and say, hey, no tech for anyone at any time. I don't think that's advantageous for most people. However, those little moments exist. And if you keep an eye out for them and you're not on tech or buried or distracted or somewhere else, they're very easy to identify. And you'll start finding more. And again, you take that time and you make it more valuable to the kids so they can build a better relationship with you. Then they'll start to look forward to those moments just as much as their old tablet time.
And on top of that, you need to be able to work through some friction. So it's funny that you had an example with Everett the other day, because I had one yesterday. We were out front. He wanted to play a game, and he brought out this game called Quicks. And it has little cards, numbers 1 through 12, whatever. You have to cross them off, and you use dice. He wanted to do his version. He came outside with 2 pieces of blank paper and a pen, and we're going to make our own list of numbers or whatever. And my first reaction was like, I just want to play the game the way it's supposed to be played.
That was a huge rule follower. She struggles with
I love
this.
this. I also love this game. But so my point is, I had to, first of all, I want to value the fact that he's using creativity. I love that. I love that he was thinking outside the box. He wasn't simply just playing the game as it needs to be, as it's supposed to be played. I want to honor that. And secondly, because I am a bit of a rule follower with games, I had to work through that friction to play it his way. It was a little uncomfortable for me, but I know the value that capturing that moment and running with it, I know the value that's going to bring to my relationship with him. Because if I had said, no, I'm not going to play this game with you unless we play it the right way, like that's not going to make him want to be creative and fun. So I think sometimes we have to look past the moment and be like, this is worth it. And I think at the end of the day, that was probably like one of my favorite moments from the day that I could have just destroyed by being like...
Melly, a rule follower.
Yes.
Sometimes it's challenging.
Oh.
But I'm glad you made the most of it in that situation. It does exist in your day, and sometimes if we have our head in the sand, we're not going to see it. I'll give you an example that I could have done better on this morning, just reflecting with you now and having a conversation on the podcast. The kids had late start on Wednesday. I'm downstairs training. Logan went to get one of the bikes. Yeah, I'm just going to do something for the 20 minutes. I got some time to kill. And it was cool that he didn't want to be on his tablet. I could have said, oh, can I go with you on a bike ride? I didn't because I was doing my own thing, but next time I will, because afterwards I thought, like, why didn't I just go on a bike ride with my kid and then I can just do my other stuff later? Put myself first, and sometimes that's important if you're having, one of the steps of the relationship is your relationship with yourself, and if you are having a real tough day and maybe you need your outlet, that's fine. But if you're having some flexible time and you're in a good mood, like, use that time. And I was in an okay mood. Not ideal. I was in a decent mood this morning, and I could have taken that opportunity to build a relationship. I missed it. I'm going to catch it next time. So there's some vulnerability for you.
That's great. I like that there is always that need for self-reflection. Not beating yourself up, just self-reflection to then be able to, again, use that word next. What can I do different next time? And not just feel bad about it. So I appreciate you saying that.
Mel, what's the second?
So mine would be spending one-on-one time with your kids. I think it's very easy. So we have 3 kids, ages 6, 12, and 14, and it's most of the time we do things together. So usually, like, we have dinner together. When I'm going to school in the morning, we're together. So you have to almost manufacture one-on-one time. So for example, with my oldest, he takes the bus to school, but on the way home I pick him up. Because I wanted to manufacture that 15 minutes of the drive home to give him a chance to have one-on-one time with me. And some days we just sit in the car and listen to music. Some days something comes up from school that either bothered him or was great. And I want to manufacture that one-on-one time. And if I didn't have that, I really think our bond would be weaker. Another example, which was almost a combination of your number 1 and number 2, after dinner you took Logan to practice. Everett went to play on my phone for 15 minutes, and Henry and I were hanging out at the table, and then ended up having this really great, deep discussion. He's very introspective, and he notices a lot of things. He's observant, and we hadn't really had a chance to have this kind of talk in a while. Had Everett been sitting there, or had Logan been sitting there, this wouldn't have been the same quality and depth of conversation. So sometimes you can manufacture those times, like I do when I pick up Logan, and hope that in 10% of the time something deep will happen. And then with Henry this time, it was almost just an opportunity that I seized. I could have gotten up and said, hey, it's time for me to wash the dishes or whatever, but he clearly had an interest in talking. So I took that opportunity. But what made it special was that it was one-on-one, and I know how much he needs that. A couple months ago, we used to sit, like, between the time that I would give Everett a bath and Logan would go shower, Henry and I would hang out a little longer upstairs. And he called it like our hangout time. And it was his chance to, like, he would just be playing basketball. We have this little indoor thing on the door. And while he'd play, he would tell me all about his day. Like, how, first of all, special it is that he feels comfortable to tell me. But secondly, it needs to be, if I had just said, okay, we're going to sit down now and we're going to talk about your day, it wouldn't have been as productive or as valuable. I think it's important to make the time to spend with that one-on-one time, even if you take a 10-minute walk with each kid. If you have a pulse on how everybody's doing in the home, there's times when you can tell one of the kids needs a little bit more. And it's not sit down and make them tell you what's going on, but make that time, take that walk, let them know that you're there. And I think that it certainly, in our case, has proven to make the relationships much deeper.
Well, you have some great points there about time. And this leads to a discussion on quality time versus quantity time with parenting. The long and short is that take what you can get, but do what you can is probably a better way of saying it. But there is research on this. Most recently, I read some research on quantity of time with your kids is just as or slightly more important in positive outcomes than quality time. So spending time around your kids is just a natural relationship builder. These moments that we're talking about just come up and you find them and you have some conversations. The contrasting parenting style is shown well in a video that Joe DeSena from Spartan Race posted on his Instagram maybe last month. I don't know the lady's name. It's not important. It's not to cast shade at anyone. It's to just show you a different way of thinking, that she was a hard-driving entrepreneur in maybe the health and wellness industry or a doctor or something. And she's going through her daily schedule and all the things that she was doing for herself, for her company, etc. And then she had I think it's like a 20-minute block to hang out with her daughter. And she's saying, that's plenty, because when I have that 20 minutes, I'm fully in. We're going to do something that she's never done before for those 20 minutes. Then I'm going to go back to my own stuff. It was an overemphasis on quality time and just simply not enough quantity time. And this is what the research shows. And if you feel panicked, I don't know what to do, I don't have any plans, that's fine. Just go be around them and see what happens. That's fine too. You don't always have to have this big idea or agenda to spend the time in a certain way. Invest the time instead by just being with them. And it's a good C.S. Lewis quote on this, is that kids are not a distraction from the most important work. Kids are the most important work.
Oh, that's lovely. I don't think I've ever heard that quote before. I think we do. I think everybody can, first of all, I admire that she would carve out time. But I agree that it's just not enough. We need, and sometimes I think, to my point earlier, we have to be really selfless. In the evening, I use this example a lot. When I do the evening debrief, this is like the last hours of the day. I'm usually ready for bed and exhausted and want some time to myself, but I know that if I don't invest that time, even if it's 10 minutes, sometimes it's 30 minutes, depending on whatever comes up, I know if I don't invest that time, it will affect my relationship with the kids.
And I am starting to believe that selfless may not be the correct word, even though that's what society uses. I don't believe you and your kids and time are on this continuum, and they're on opposite ends, pulling at each other. Either you have your time or you give the kids time. And either you're selfless and you give all your time to your kid, or you're selfish and keep it to yourself. I think that has a negative connotation. I think society is screwing up that pretty significantly. I would rather propose this, that we take a more long-term vision of life than the short-term vision. I don't think it's selfless, selfish. In the long term, it is important to have kids that have healthy relationships and grow up. They're the most important work in your life. Short-term vision is saying, I can just put it off to tomorrow. It's the short-term diet stuff. I can eat healthy tomorrow. I'm going to eat healthy tomorrow. Next Monday, I'm going to start. Wait till January, New Year's resolution season. Parents do the same thing with their kids, unfortunately. And it is almost natural, because this is how we think, and just day by day. And we're not taking a long-term vision of, that's what I want to encourage you. That's why we have core values. That's why we have the strong family path, that you're taking the long road to a very successful and bright future. I don't think that is selfish or selfless. I think that's where we all want to go. It just takes us some inner dialogue to be able to realize that our actions today will affect the success in the long term.
Well, another helpful way to look at it is making deposits. I know we've mentioned this before. You make deposits into a relationship, and every time that you need something from that person, it's like taking a withdrawal. Or I use this example with my kids. One of my kids was teasing the other, and like a lot, not just a little bit. And I was like, you're withdrawing from your relationship with your brother. It's like making money withdrawals from the bank. You need to also deposit into that relationship. So I think using that terminology with kids is helpful, because they start to see it. Every time you spend time with them, that's making deposits. And as they spend time with each other, they start to understand that they need to do things for the other person or with the other person to make deposits into that relationship. So in the long run, you have a huge investment.
Number 3, affecting how they view life. If you want to build a relationship with anybody, and this goes 10 times for your kids, you need to affect their personal philosophy. When you see people that have strong relationships with their parents down the road, even long after their parents passed, they'll say, my dad taught me this. I learned this from my mom. That affected who they are for their entire life. If you take this lukewarm stance of just be whatever you want to be to like a 6-year-old, like they don't know and they just float around, they'll find someone else to attach themselves to, adopt the other person's personal philosophy, whether you agree with it or not. And now that person has a deeper relationship with your kids than you do. And so having core values is absolutely the first step. It is the first podcast we shot. I'm going to beat this drum all the time. You got to establish what you stand for. Otherwise, you stand for nothing. Everything's lukewarm, and you can't really teach if you have no direction to go in. So you need time to establish your core values. You teach those values to your kids. You teach examples of them. You role model life. You help them through those things, and all of a sudden, they're adopting your personal philosophy, and that's a relationship that is virtually unbreakable.
Kids will fill in the blanks in their own way or with other kids' understanding if you don't give them your understanding. And I've been framing this a little differently lately with the kids. I've been using the words, I want you to be able to critically think. So some things will come up at school that our values might not align with. And I love that they're seeing that there is is unalignment a word? They're not in alignment?
Misalignment.
Misalignment? Okay. I know it didn't sound right. So I try to use those words with them. I want you to learn to critically think. I don't want you to just accept whatever you hear at school as truth. If something doesn't seem right or if it doesn't quite jive with what we're saying at home, let's talk about it. But they would never be able to critically think if we're not providing them those values and our thoughts about things. And Henry, being so insightful yesterday, he said, that must be really hard for Everett, because at age 6, if you hear something, you're just going to accept what the teacher is saying, because usually at that age, you just are extremely trusting. You're not really at the point where you're saying, that doesn't sound right. And I love that Everett will come and tell me what they're learning. They're learning about helping the earth. And there's a couple things that might have come up that I was like, Everett, let's look at it this way. But naturally, he wouldn't do that. But we're trying to work towards that. But my point really is, your kids won't be able to have those kind of critical thinking skills if you're not taking the time to share your philosophy.
You need to have the inner strength to do this. There's going to be some nerd parents that see this or comment on, just like, oh, I don't want my kids to grow up to be robots. I don't want to tell them what to do. They can think for themselves. All right, easy. What you're doing is taking the easy way out by not teaching them anything and just letting them into the wild to solve it for themselves with no skills. There is a balance here. You don't want to control every aspect of their life, but you want to teach them skills and mental frameworks to solve life for themselves. And that's a tremendous difference. It requires more than surface level thinking, and it requires a little bit more effort than just that comment that I see out there, which fires me up now. I tried to do that as clean as possible.
That's fine. There is such a, how do I put this? You don't have to tell your kid what to believe. You can say, this is what we believe as a family. This is what Dad and I live out, and I'd love to hear what you think. Or I make sure that kids understand, like someday they will be on their own and they could do it their way. But I want to we have a family identity, which like you said already with the values, and they do buy into it because we live it out. So you have to also back up your philosophy with role modeling. You have to actually live it out as well. We're not forcing things down their throat. We're simply giving them, because, yeah, if you don't believe, what is that phrase? If you don't believe in anything, you fall for everything. If you don't... Yeah, I think you did it. Don't laugh. Okay,
I think you did
good.
it.
Because I don't want to send them out there and have them just fall for everything. I want them, even if they decide something that doesn't align with what we believe, at least they thought it through and had the skill set to critically think.
Before I get on another rant, we're going to move to number 4, because it does, oh man, I'm fighting it. We're going to go on number 4, and I just highly encourage you, the listener, and I believe if you're listening to Strong Family Project, you're very interested in this, is have a philosophy, have values, teach those values, teach that philosophy, and to do so in a way where you're using life examples in a way to benefit the kids. All right, number 4, and the one I don't think a lot of people will consider, is get your kids to do things they don't want to do. There's a lot that happens in this process. Number 1, they see you as a helpful guide to their journey. This is classic storytelling. They want to go, let's say they want to go do rock climbing, and they're like, oh no, I'm scared of heights. You say, okay, never mind, let's not do it. Or you can slowly build up and use a ton of different tools. We're not going to get into all of it and teach them how to do it. The example earlier that I used with our older son, who didn't want to play sports, played it, has got a lot of lessons learned. Our middle one, who got anxiety over going to things, had to work through it so that he could have a better outcome. Our role is to guide them alongside and not just letting them off easy. And that is a very hard conversation. I don't like to do it. I don't like to feel like I'm forcing kids to do things. But in taking the long-term vision, I know they have to work through difficult times. It stinks to see your kids suffer. And it's usually more internal than like an external physical thing. It's not like, carrying wood up the mountain or something like that. Like, they're not physically suffering. They're mentally can't quite figure out how to get through this challenge. You come alongside them and help them through it, and that builds a tremendous relationship with the kids. Or even as adults, if in business I didn't know something, I looked to a mentor and they helped guide me through it. I felt so much better and deeper connection with them. Physical challenges, doing long ultra races or whatever, having someone come alongside and say, oh, here's how you could possibly do this. Like, I'll always remember that help and guidance to do something that I didn't necessarily want to do. I didn't have the skills to do, but I had to go outside of my comfort zone. They were there and they made it practical and possible. And I'll always remember those relationships. And you can do the same thing with your kids. I just want to put those words out there so that next time something comes up that you really think is important, don't fold like a lawn chair on it. Help guide them through it.
Yeah, we have to fight our nature in a way, because I think, at least for myself, my nature is to just take care of it for them. Or if you don't like that, it's okay, don't do it. Or you mentioned earlier how when we were considering having Logan do football or choosing a sport, my natural reaction was like, if he doesn't really want to do it, we probably should make him do it. And I think now, seeing the other end of it, 2 seasons in, and how much he's changed, and confidence and friendships he's made and all these different things, and even strength, like, he loves the fact that he feels stronger and more in shape. I have to remember that now, so the next time something comes up and my initial natural reaction is saving them from it, I need to make sure I remember. Like, I know that when they go through something difficult, with us alongside them, or some kind of a support system alongside them, they will come out stronger and it will be worthwhile. But I think it's important to acknowledge, if your initial reaction is like just protecting them, that's important to a degree. But Logan's 14, he's only I hate saying this, a couple of years away from potentially being on his own, and we have to make sure we foster that, and that does require hard things. Just like when you did the rites of passage with them, I think Logan said to himself, I don't think I can do it. But he did it, and now he can say to himself, hey, I thought I couldn't, I did it, and Pikes Peak is, basically right outside the door, and they can look at it at any time and remember that they can do hard things. But I think that does wear off. You have to continually do hard things to keep that skill sharp.
Absolutely. I'll always remember when I went to Colgate. This is 2000. This is a long time ago. And my roommate and I were there a couple weeks early for the football preseason, and then the other kids came in. There was one kid on this floor that was a few doors down and on the left. His name was John, and normal looking kid gets dropped off by his parents, and he starts having a meltdown. This kid's 18 or 19. He's on the floor crying, holding onto his mom's pant leg because he had never been alone or done any hard things. How did that upbringing get him to this point? How can you allow that to not drip in some hard things and avoid a major issue? Obviously, he was unsuccessful in college, and he dropped out after the first year. It was not anything to do with his academics. Very sharp kid, personable kid, nice, but he did not have the skill set to be alone, and nothing to do with the academic side of it. And that was very unfortunate. Now you read stories about parents going to job interviews with their kids. When are you going to cut the cord? You guys teach these kids these skills. You showing up at a job interview is not helping your kids. It is showing that you did a horrendous job, and now you're trying to carry them even further in life. Push them out of the nest. Let them do hard things. Be there with them along the way when it is age appropriate, and then they can be successful when they're on their own. You're doing a complete disservice if you're training them this learned dependence on you as a parent. No matter how good it feels, and no matter how safe it makes them feel when they're 16, 17, 18, as we get more to an age-appropriate behavior for them to show more independence, You have to let go and you have to guide when appropriate. And that's how you build a relationship. You don't build relationships by making people dependent on you.
As is so much in life, it's a process. My kid isn't going to wake up one day, oh, I'm 18 now, I'm an adult, I know exactly how to handle life. So much of this entire podcast is about the process. What can you do now on a daily basis, on a whatever? What can you do now in little pieces so that when they do go to college, they can be dropped off and be successful and have confidence? Because I think I think our natural response is to just want to protect the kids, but like it gets ridiculous when they're that old and they can't manage themselves. So we have to see it as a process. We have to see what can we do now. A couple examples for us we've talked about. Logan goes up to this office at the next town over and spends a couple hours there on the weekends. There's not necessarily an adult there. He just goes and he's learning how to be independent. Henry goes and plays basketball with his buddies down at the park. He can ride his bike down there, have a couple hours on his own to start to learn to have self-confidence. Again, my point in sharing this is that it needs to be a process over time. You can't wake up and they're 18 and all of a sudden, push them out of the nest. The skills have to be developed over time.
When we were growing up, we would just be gone until the street lights came on, and then you'd come home. That was independent time. That started in middle school, and now things are different. Perhaps you don't live in an area or neighborhood that allows that makes that practical. But we have to find ways to live that lifestyle in today's world. Letting them be independent, forcing them to go outside and solve their boredom problems, giving them different opportunities. I let them park the truck a little bit in the driveway, like teaching some independence to show them that they are growing up, that you have to let go as well as them, getting them to do things they didn't want to do, affecting their philosophy and taking opportunities when they arise. So there's a bunch of ways to build deeper, meaningful relationships with your kids. It'll pay off with a lot of dividends, including less issues, less arguments in the household, better long-term relationship. It is tremendously worth it. Thank you for listening to another episode. Visit us at strongfamilyproject.com where you can download all steps of the path for free. Talk to you